Do you know the fascinating story of one of the greatest philosophers of all time, Plato? Welcome to the channel where we delve deeply into his ideas, life, and immense influence on Western thought. Join us as we trace the legacy he left behind, from his famous theory of forms to the founding of the Academy of Philosophy. Part 1. Childhood in Athens. Plato, born with the given name Aristocles, came into the world in 427 BCE in the mighty city of Athens. His birthplace played a pivotal role in shaping him, as at that time Athens was the intellectual and cultural heart of ancient Greece, a hub for philosophy, art, and politics. Plato's childhood unfolded in a turbulent context marked by the Peloponnesian War, a protracted conflict between Athens and Sparta that later profoundly influenced his views on war, governance, and society. Plato was born into an aristocratic family deeply embedded in Athenian political life. His father, Aristotle, was believed to be descended from the ancient kings of Athens, while his mother, Perictiona, was related to the family of Solon, the great lawmaker. This noble lineage provided Plato with an upbringing steeped not only in wealth, but also in the presence of Athens' political and cultural elite. From a young age, he was surrounded by lively discussions on justice, power, and governance, themes that would later become central pillars in his philosophical writings. As a youth, Plato received the well-rounded education expected of an Athenian noble. He studied poetry, music, gymnastics, and the arts, for the Greeks believed that a harmonious development of mind and body was essential for an ideal human being. However, Plato displayed an early and exceptional passion for intellectual pursuits, excelling in areas such as poetry and rhetoric. It is said that he was once a promising playwright, having penned several tragedies. But the greatest turning point in his life came with his encounter with the philosopher Socrates. This fateful meeting led Plato to abandon his theatrical ambitions, realizing his true calling lay on the path of philosophical inquiry. This transformation occurred during Athens' struggle to recover from the deep scars left by the Peloponnesian War. This war not only weakened Athens militarily and economically, but also caused severe moral and political damage. The crushing defeat by Sparta in 404 BCE paved the way for the brief establishment of a brutal oligarchic regime known as the 30 Tyrants. This regime, led by figures such as Critias, a relative of Plato, became infamous for its bloody suppression of political opponents. Although Plato had familial ties to these rulers, he soon became disillusioned by the cruelty and violence that the oligarchy unleashed. These political wounds left a deep mark on his mind, shaping his reflections on the nature of power and the perils of tyranny. The chaos in Athens during Plato's formative years also made him acutely aware of the fragility and volatility of popular democracy, sowing the seeds of his lifelong skepticism towards it. Plato witnessed firsthand how the Athenian masses could be easily manipulated by demagogues, and how even a mighty city-state could rapidly descend into political instability and ruin. The role of Socrates in awakening Plato's intellect was pivotal, even if it came somewhat later in Plato's early life. The precise details of their first meeting remain unclear, but most scholars agree that Plato became a devoted disciple of the older philosopher in his early 20s. Socrates, who never wrote down his teachings, conveyed his wisdom primarily through dialogue, employing the relentless questioning approach now known as the Socratic method. This method challenged every conventional assumption, forcing interlocutors to engage in profound self-examination. In Socrates, Plato saw the perfect model of a philosophical life. Socrates, with his focus on the pursuit of genuine morality over the hollow victories of rhetoric or sophistry, laid the intellectual foundation for Plato's later works. Plato's early experiences with Socrates took place amid a period of intense political and social upheaval in Athens. The Peloponnesian War had shaken many Athenians' faith in democracy, especially after the city's bitter defeat. In this climate of disillusionment, Socrates became a beacon of light for those yearning for truth, urging them to question everything from moral values to the functioning of the state. Plato, then a young man with a sharp mind and insatiable curiosity, embraced these teachings with fervor. He was captivated not only by the ideas Socrates espoused, but also by the very process of philosophical dialogue, participating in dialectical debates with Socrates and fellow Athenians. These experiences shaped Plato's view of philosophy not merely as an accumulation of knowledge, but as a method of profound truth-seeking. Although deeply admiring Socrates, Plato also grasped the dangers that philosophical questioning could invite in a society rife with instability. In 399 BCE, when Plato was about 28 years old, Socrates was brought to trial on charges of corrupting the youth of Athens and spreading impious doctrines. This trial became a pivotal moment not only in Plato's life, but also in his philosophical journey. Present at the trial, Plato witnessed firsthand how Athenian democracy could be manipulated to crush those who dared to question societal norms. Socrates' sentencing to death and his forced consumption of hemlock left Plato with deep bitterness. This tragedy propelled him onto a lifelong quest to uncover the true nature of justice, knowledge, and the philosopher's role in society. After Socrates' death, Plato left Athens disillusioned by the city's corrupt and unstable political atmosphere. He embarked on journeys of study and exploration, traveling to distant lands such as Egypt and Italy. These travels broadened Plato's horizons, exposing him to diverse philosophical traditions and systems of thought that enriched his understanding of the world. In Egypt, for instance, he is believed to have studied mathematics and astronomy, disciplines that later influenced his unique philosophical reasoning. These explorations became an integral part of his later philosophical works. In Italy, Plato encountered the followers of Pythagoras, thinkers deeply committed to the immortality of the soul and the centrality of numbers in geometry. These ideas profoundly shaped Plato's metaphysical thinking as he began to recognize the importance of abstract forms and the underlying structure of reality. Pythagoras' belief in a hidden order behind the visible world resonated deeply with Plato's emerging worldview. This period of intellectual discovery was especially significant for Plato, allowing him to synthesize various streams of thought into a coherent and logical philosophical system. From here, he began laying the foundations of his own distinctive philosophy. When Plato returned to Athens in the early 380s BCE, he was ready to assert himself as a true philosopher. Carrying with him the wisdom of Socrates and the treasures of many philosophical traditions, Plato began to shape his unique ideas about the nature of knowledge, reality, and justice. These reflections led him to a crucial milestone in 387 BCE. Plato founded the Academy, a scholarly center where students could come to study philosophy, mathematics, and science under his direct guidance. This was not merely an institution of learning, but a symbol of Plato's enduring ideals of education and truth-seeking. The founding of the Academy is regarded as one of Plato's greatest achievements, marking a turning point in the history of education. It was the first institution of higher learning in the Western world and became a model for future universities. The Academy was not just a place for the transmission of knowledge, but a community of dedicated scholars united in their pursuit of wisdom and truth. Plato envisioned the Academy as a space where philosophy could flourish, free from the constraints of political power and everyday pressures. He believed that philosophy was not merely an intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a journey of self-discovery leading toward human excellence. Plato held that true knowledge could only be attained through rigorous philosophical reasoning, and that the role of the philosopher was to ceaselessly pursue truth for the betterment of society. The academy gradually became a training ground for future leaders, many of whom later played key roles in the political and intellectual life of Greece. Among its most illustrious students was Aristotle, who would go on not only to inherit Plato's legacy, but also to challenge and expand it, ushering philosophy into a new era. Plato's early experiences, his aristocratic upbringing, artistic education, fateful meeting with Socrates, and journeys to distant lands, all coalesced into a distinctive philosophical perspective that became the foundation of his entire career. His profound disillusionment with Athenian democracy, combined with his exposure to diverse philosophical traditions, spurred him to ask fundamental questions about the nature of reality, morality, and governance. This period of intellectual and personal development reached its climax with the founding of the Academy, paving the way for the philosophical system that bore Plato's unique imprint. In exploring foundational issues of philosophy and experiencing the complexity of human existence through dialogue, Plato came to see philosophy not merely as an academic field, but as a way of life. Socrates, with his habit of relentlessly questioning traditional authority, and even his own beliefs, inspired Plato to develop a systematic philosophy aimed at understanding the true nature of reality, knowledge, and morality. One of the central themes in Socratic philosophy, and an idea that Plato would later explore more deeply, was the notion of the examined life. Socrates famously declared that the unexamined life is not worth living. For him, this meant that individuals must continually reflect on their actions, beliefs, and values to lead a good and just life. This emphasis on self-examination and moral reflection became foundational in Plato's philosophy. In his writings, energetic dialogues show Socrates constantly challenging his interlocutors to scrutinize their own lives and question assumptions about what is good and just. These early experiences deeply shaped Plato's views on education and the philosopher's role in society. For Socrates, education was not about one-sided knowledge transmission, but about awakening the mind to pursue truth. He believed that true learning came through dialogue and self-reflection, not passive memorization or acceptance. Plato embraced this idea and extended it in his own philosophy, especially through his famous allegory of the cave. In this metaphor, Plato describes humans as prisoners chained in a dark cave, able to see only shadows cast on the wall, mistaking them for reality. Only by breaking free and stepping into the sunlight can they perceive the true nature of the world. This metaphor, developed in Plato's later years, was deeply influenced by Socratic teachings. It symbolizes the philosopher's journey from ignorance to enlightenment, a journey that Plato himself had begun under Socrates' guidance. The allegory also reflects Plato's deep belief that most people live in a state of ignorance, mistaking appearances for the essence of things. The philosopher's mission, he believed, was to lead others out of that cave and help them see the truth. The idea of the philosopher as a spiritual guide became a central theme in many of Plato's works, especially when he spoke of the role of the philosopher king. Part 2. The Fateful Encounter with Socrates. The meeting between Plato and Socrates was one of the most pivotal turning points in Plato's life. Though born into a wealthy family with close ties to the political elite, Plato's early intellectual pursuits were not directed toward philosophy. Like many other young men of Athens' upper class, he was trained in poetry, rhetoric, and perhaps even the art of governing a state. However, everything changed when Plato happened to meet Socrates, a man not born into wealth or power, yet possessing a remarkable intellect, powerful enough to shape the course of Western philosophy. Socrates was renowned for his unorthodox methods, which sharply contrasted with the rigid frameworks of Athenian intellectuals. He would wander the streets engaging in dialogues with people from all walks of life, asking piercing questions about their beliefs and forcing them to re-examine their ways of living. For Socrates, teaching was not about imparting knowledge, but about awakening critical thinking.
The Socratic method, a style of dialogue that relies on asking questions, exposed contradictions in reasoning, and compelled listeners to gain deeper insights into fundamental truths. The relationship between Plato and Socrates went far beyond the typical teacher-student dynamic. It was an intellectual bond where Socrates constantly challenged Plato with profound questions, sparking in him a deep desire to understand morality, justice, and the nature of knowledge. Since Socrates never wrote down his ideas, most of his philosophy is known through the dialogues recorded by Plato. In these works, Socrates is often the central figure, engaging in debates about virtue, wisdom, and the good life. Through these dialogues, Plato not only preserved Socrates' legacy, but also used that very method to develop his own philosophy. Socrates approached knowledge in a radically different way, unlike the sophists, professional teachers of rhetoric who charged fees for their services. Socrates never claimed to possess knowledge to sell. Instead, he became famous for declaring, "The only thing I know is that I know nothing." This seemingly paradoxical statement was not mere humility, but a profound philosophical stance. He believed that true wisdom begins with recognizing one's own ignorance and an unending quest for truth. It was this relentless pursuit of knowledge that drew Plato to Socrates. Socrates' emphasis on questioning rather than blindly accepting conventional ideas resonated with Plato's growing disillusionment toward Athens' political and social structures. When Plato began studying under Socrates, Athens was in turmoil. The decades-long Peloponnesian War had left the city exhausted both militarily and economically. Athens' defeat to Sparta in 404 BCE had devastating consequences for its political system. After the war, the city fell under the rule of a brutal but short-lived oligarchic regime known as the 30 Tyrants. During this period, a small group of wealthy Athenians seized control, ruling through terror, suppressing political opponents, and confiscating property. Although this regime quickly collapsed, its bloody legacy left a deep scar in the Athenian psyche, fueling doubts about the viability of democracy. Plato was personally connected to this chaotic era through his family. His uncle Critias was one of the leaders of the 30 Tyrants. However, Plato did not share sympathy for his powerful relatives. On the contrary, he saw in their actions the dangerous potential of unchecked power and the moral corruption that stemmed from political ambition. These experiences deepened Plato's conviction that the pursuit of power for personal gain, whether in democratic or oligarchic forms, was a path to ruin. Only through the pursuit of wisdom and cultivation of virtue could humanity build a just society. Socrates' influence on Plato during this period was profound. While many others were preoccupied with seizing power and handling the practical matters of governance, Socrates devoted his attention to more abstract questions about justice, the good life, and the meaning of being human. Socrates' soul cared nothing for political power or material wealth. He lived simply and dedicated his life to questioning the moral foundations of Athenian society. To Plato, Socrates embodied a new kind of intellectual hero, one who placed truth and virtue above all worldly success. The relationship between Plato and Socrates was not merely that of teacher and student, but a shared intellectual journey in which both sought to uncover the profound truths hidden beneath the surface of life. Part 3. The Death of Socrates. In 399 BCE, Athens was still scarred by the Peloponnesian War. The city was slowly rising from the ashes, but beneath its calm surface simmered waves of anxiety and suspicion. In this atmosphere, Socrates, the philosopher who had devoted his life to the pursuit of truth, became the target of a society fearful of dissenting voices. For Plato, his young disciple, this event was not only a personal shock, but also a moment that forever transformed his view of the world. Socrates had long been a controversial figure.
He openly questioned every foundation, from religion and tradition to political power. His sharp dialogues stripped away the pretensions of those who claimed wisdom, irritating many among Athens' elite. The powerful despised him, and ordinary citizens were incited to believe he posed a threat to the social order. Socrates' associations were also used as evidence against him. Alcibiades, a charming but cunning politician who had betrayed Athens, and Critias, Plato's relative and one of the 30 tyrants who ruled Athens with violence, had both been his students. Though Socrates had no direct involvement in their actions, public opinion quickly linked him to the shadow of treachery. The charges brought against Socrates carried two main accusations: corrupting the youth of Athens and impiety. But beneath these charges lay a deeper political motive. A democracy newly emerged from war feared that a man like Socrates, with his uncompromising intellect, could disrupt the fragile order they were trying to preserve. The trial became a tragic drama that Plato would never forget. In the Apology, he described Socrates' defense not as a plea for mercy, but as a defiant declaration. Socrates stood before the jury, asserting that he had done only one thing: helping Athenians examine themselves, challenge false wisdom, and seek the truth. He delivered his immortal line, "The unexamined life is not worth living." But his frankness only poured fuel on the fire. When allowed to propose an alternative punishment, Socrates, rather than humbling himself, suggested that he deserved to be honored as a benefactor of the city. This pride enraged the assembly, and they quickly sentenced him to death by drinking hemlock. In his final hours recorded in Phaedo, Socrates remained calm, surrounded by grieving disciples. He spoke of the immortal soul, of death as a liberation. As the cup of poison was raised to his lips, he showed no trembling, no fear, only an unshakable faith in the philosophy he had devoted his life to. For Plato, this was not merely the death of a teacher, but a deep wound in his faith in Athenian democracy. That democracy, which claimed to celebrate freedom and tolerance, had turned its back on its most honest voice. In despair, Plato left Athens. He embarked on long journeys to Megara to meet contemporary philosophers, to Egypt to study mathematics and religion. These years became a time of reflection for Plato. How could a righteous man be condemned by a system that claimed to protect justice? From this question, Plato built his philosophy. In the Republic, he envisioned an ideal society ruled by philosopher kings, those who placed reason and truth above the desires of the masses. He argued that justice could not be left to the fickle will of the majority, but must be guided by superior wisdom. Socrates' death also pushed Plato to delve deeper into the nature of the soul. He developed his theory of forms, eternal realities that the human soul had once encountered before birth. For Plato, knowledge was not the acquisition of new information, but a process of recollection of truths already known. To Plato, Socrates did not die. He became immortal in the questions he planted in his disciples' mind. Socrates' calmness in the face of death became the ultimate symbol of the philosophical spirit confronting fear, challenging injustice, and endlessly seeking truth even at the cost of one's life. The quest for true knowledge and virtue, and the role of the philosopher in a world seemingly hostile to reason and truth, would haunt Plato for the rest of his life. Part 4. Plato's Journey Abroad. After Socrates' death, Plato's first reaction was to leave Athens, the city that had tried and condemned the teacher he revered so deeply. To Plato, it was no longer a place where he could live and pursue his philosophical ideals. This period of travel became not only a physical journey, but also an intellectual odyssey for Plato, allowing him to refine his ideas and seek new knowledge across various regions of the ancient world. Although specific details of his travels remain somewhat obscure, historical records and later anecdotes suggest he visited several important destinations. Each stop contributed to the nourishment and expansion of his philosophical thinking. His journey took him to places like Megara, Cyrene, Egypt, and southern Italy, where he encountered a rich diversity of cultures, doctrines, and philosophies. Plato's first stop after leaving Athens was Megara, where he sought refuge not among mathematicians, but with a fellow disciple of Socrates who had founded his own philosophical school. The philosophers of Megara were known for their fascination with Eleatic philosophy, particularly the teachings of Parmenides and Zeno, who believed that reality is unchanging and that all motion and change are mere illusions. These ideas later sowed the seeds for Plato's theory of forms, a vision of the material world as only a shadow of a higher, immutable reality beyond human perception. The Megarians' paradoxical reasoning and their sharp exploration of the nature of existence helped Plato further develop his dialectical skills, which he had initially honed under Socrates. After some time in Megara, Plato continued on a broader journey to Cyrene in North Africa. This city was renowned as an intellectual and philosophical center, especially in mathematics. It is said that Plato studied under Theodorus of Cyrene, a prominent mathematician of the time. This experience further strengthened Plato's conviction in the essential role of mathematics as a bridge to understanding the deeper nature of reality. For him, mathematics was not just a tool, but a gateway to the pure world of eternal forms, unchanging truths, in stark contrast to the flux of the material world. This idea later became foundational in works such as The Republic, where Plato emphasized that a philosopher king must be rigorously trained in mathematics to grasp higher realms of reality. From Cyrene, Plato traveled to Egypt, one of the most ancient and advanced civilizations of the time. Egypt was famed for its architectural marvels, scientific achievements, religious practices, and mathematical knowledge. It is believed that Plato spent time studying with Egyptian priests who were regarded as the guardians of both practical and mystical knowledge. Here, Plato deepened his understanding of geometry, further reinforcing his appreciation of mathematics as a key to deciphering the universe. Beyond mathematics, Plato may also have absorbed Egyptian religious ideas, particularly beliefs about the afterlife and the immortality of the soul. The notion that the soul continues its journey after death became central to his philosophical reflections on human nature and existence. Plato's time in Egypt may also have shaped his vision of the philosopher's role in society. Egyptian priests were not merely religious leaders. They were scholars, astronomers, and healers, an embodiment of intellectual authority that Plato admired. Later, Plato advocated for a similar role for philosophers in his ideal society, where philosopher kings would not only rule wisely, but also safeguard knowledge and balance power with intellect. His vision of an enlightened ruling class trained in mathematics, philosophy, and the arts was likely influenced by his encounter with Egyptian priests, whose role in preserving order and knowledge left a lasting impression on him. After leaving Egypt, these impressions continued to resonate, shaping Plato's ideal of a leadership devoted to wisdom and the guidance of the community. Plato's journey next took him to southern Italy, where he met the followers of the Pythagorean school, a community of philosophers and mathematicians who adhered to Pythagoras' teachings. They believed that numbers and mathematical ratios were the core foundation of the universe, and that all reality could be deciphered through the study of mathematics and harmony. They also embraced the idea of the soul's transmigration, the belief that the immortal soul undergoes multiple rebirths, moving from one body to another on a path toward purification and wisdom. These concepts deeply influenced Plato, particularly the Pythagorean belief in universal harmony and the soul's immortality. Pythagoras emphasized the crucial role of numbers and mathematics as the unshakable foundation of reality, which reinforced Plato's conviction that the material world is merely a reflection of higher abstract truths. The influence of Pythagorean thought is evident in Plato's dialogues, especially the Republic, where he developed his theory of ideal forms. Plato argued that because the material world is ever-changing, it cannot be the source of true knowledge. Instead, genuine understanding must come from grasping the eternal, immutable forms existing in a higher plane of reality. This idea, rich in Pythagorean flavor, emphasized the distinction between the world of appearances and the eternal realm of truth. Similarly, the Pythagorean belief in the soul's immortality and its purification through successive lives became a cornerstone of Plato's doctrines on the soul, most notably in works like Phaedo and Phaedrus. In addition to engaging with the Pythagoreans, Plato's time in southern Italy also took him to Syracuse, a powerful Greek city-state ruled by successive tyrants. Plato's deep concern for politics and his question of how to build a just and stable society drew him into the affairs of Syracuse. His experiences there later became one of the most challenging and defining periods of his life. Plato initially believed that Syracuse's rulers could be educated in philosophy and transformed into philosopher kings, wise and virtuous leaders capable of governing justly. But his efforts to reform Syracuse's politics ultimately ended in failure and left him profoundly disillusioned. During his first visit, Plato met Dion, the brother-in-law of the tyrant Dionysius I. Dion, who was passionate about philosophy, became captivated by Plato's ideas and believed they could reform Syracuse's government into a fairer and more enlightened society. Dion introduced Plato to Dionysius, but the tyrant was more interested in consolidating his power than in pursuing philosophical knowledge. Despite his initial disappointment, Plato returned to Syracuse years later at the invitation of Dionysius II, the son of the previous tyrant. He harbored hopes of realizing his ideal of a philosopher king. However, Plato's experience in Syracuse was overshadowed by political intrigue, betrayal, and personal bitterness. At first, Dionysius II showed interest in Plato's philosophy, but his commitment was shallow, and his true concern remained the preservation of his power and wealth. Plato's attempt to educate the young ruler in justice and wisdom met fierce resistance from Dionysius himself and the entrenched political forces in the city. Eventually, Dion was exiled, and Plato became a political prisoner caught in the midst of brutal power struggles. Ultimately, Plato narrowly escaped Syracuse with his life. Yet the bitter experience left him completely disillusioned with the idea that philosophy could reform tyrannical regimes. His travels across distant lands, particularly his intense experiences in Syracuse, only reinforced Plato's belief that true political reform was impossible without a fundamental transformation in the nature of those who wielded power. The crushing failure of his attempt to mold Dionysius II into a philosopher king laid bare the immense difficulty of applying philosophical principles to real-world politics. Plato realized that the ideals of wisdom and justice could not easily coexist with the ambitions of power in practice. This sharp awareness left a profound mark on many of his later works, most notably The Republic, where he envisioned a utopian society governed not by tyrants or cunning politicians, but by philosophers, people rigorously trained to devote themselves entirely to truth and virtue. When Plato returned to Athens around the early 380s BCE, he carried with him a wealth of ideas and experiences that would form the foundation of his mature philosophical system. His journeys had deepened his understanding of mathematics, metaphysics, and politics, and strengthened his conviction that true knowledge could only be achieved through serious and persistent philosophical inquiry. Upon his return to Athens, Plato founded the Academy, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world.
There he taught his students and continued to refine and develop the great philosophical ideas that would occupy him for the rest of his life.
Part 5. The Founding of the Academy. After years of traveling, exploring, and reflecting, Plato returned to Athens around 387 BCE with a burning desire to create a stable environment where he could continue his philosophical research and share his knowledge with minds eager for understanding. Although Athens was still politically unstable after the upheavals of the Peloponnesian War, the city remained a center of intellectual exchange and learning. Plato sensed an urgent need for a structured educational environment, a place that would not only serve as a refuge for those in pursuit of wisdom, but also as a cradle for nurturing future leaders. From this spirit, he founded the academy named after the grove of Academos outside Athens' city walls. This institution quickly became one of the most important philosophical centers in ancient Greece and laid the foundations for higher education as we know it today. Plato's establishment of the academy marked a significant departure from traditional Athenian education, which was largely informal and led by private tutors or small groups. While some schools, like the Sophists, taught rhetoric and practical skills for high fees, there had never been an institution devoted solely to the systematic pursuit of knowledge. Plato's academy changed that by providing a space where philosophy, mathematics, science, and the arts were studied comprehensively and collectively. His vision extended beyond individual enlightenment to training leaders capable of applying philosophical wisdom to the governance of society. At the heart of the academy was Plato's steadfast belief that education was not merely a tool for acquiring skills or knowledge to succeed in the material world, but above all, a means to nurture the soul and prepare individuals for a virtuous and profoundly thoughtful life. This idea was deeply influenced by Socrates the teacher, who had instilled in Plato the conviction that wisdom and virtue are life's highest goals. Thus, the academy became a place where students were encouraged to think critically, challenge assumptions, and engage in deep philosophical inquiry. In stark contrast to the Sophists, whom Plato criticized for teaching rhetoric to win arguments rather than seek truth, the academy championed dialectic, the method of dialogue and reasoning pioneered by Socrates to uncover the truths hidden beneath surface appearances. The curriculum at Plato's academy was remarkably diverse, reflecting his profound belief in the interconnectedness of all forms of knowledge. Mathematics played a central role, not merely as a practical tool, but as a gateway to discovering the underlying order of the universe. Strongly influenced by the Pythagorean school during his earlier travels, Plato shared the view that numbers and mathematical relationships are keys to unlocking both the material world and the abstract realm of ideal forms. Geometry, in particular, was regarded as a way to train abstract thinking and prepare students for higher philosophical study. It is said that above the entrance to the academy was inscribed the phrase, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter." This reflected the importance Plato placed on mathematics as the foundation of philosophy. In addition to mathematics, the academy taught astronomy, ethics, politics, and metaphysics, because Plato believed that studying the natural world could lead to a deeper understanding of the perfect forms, eternal realities existing beyond the material world. To Plato, the visible world was ever-changing and flawed, while forms such as justice, beauty, and equality were unchanging and could only be grasped through reason and intellectual contemplation. Thus, the academy was not only a place for exploring the material world, but also a gateway to the deeper truths hidden beneath it. The theory of forms, one of the cornerstones of Plato's philosophy, became a central focus of teaching at the academy and left a lasting influence on generations of philosophers to come. Perhaps one of the academy's most unique aspects was its spirit of openness and collaboration. Unlike modern universities with rigid class structures and fixed curricula, the academy operated as a dynamic philosophical community where teachers and students engaged in continuous dialogue, debate, and intellectual exchange. There was no set syllabus. Instead, students were encouraged to pursue their own intellectual interests, guided by dialectical and philosophical inquiry, creating a vibrant environment of shared ideas.
Plato himself was deeply involved in the daily life of the academy, often personally leading discussions and participating in debates with his students. Among his most outstanding pupils was Aristotle, who would later become one of history's greatest philosophers. Aristotle joined the academy around 367 BCE as a young man and studied under Plato for nearly 2 decades.
While sharing many philosophical concerns, especially in metaphysics and ethics, Aristotle eventually challenged several of Plato's ideas. He argued that Plato's division between the material world and the world of forms was too extreme, and believed that knowledge could also be attained through empirical observation, rather than abstract contemplation alone. The intellectual relationship between Plato and Aristotle is considered one of the most significant connections in the history of Western philosophy, and vividly reflects the lively atmosphere fostered by the academy. The academy was not just a school of philosophy, it was also one of the leading scientific research centers of its time. In addition to exploring ethics and metaphysics, students there delved into astronomy, biology, and various natural sciences. Plato himself had a deep interest in cosmology and the nature of the universe, as reflected in his dialogues, where he described the cosmos as an ordered and harmonious structure created by a divine craftsman, the demiurge. Plato believed that studying the natural world could yield profound insights into the rational order underlying the universe and human existence. His faith in the harmony of the cosmos, coupled with the importance of understanding the natural world, became pillars of the academy's curriculum. Though it focused mainly on philosophy and science, the academy also played a significant role in Athens' political life. Plato believed that philosophers had a duty to apply their wisdom to governance, and many of his students went on to become influential leaders and political advisors. Plato's bitter experiences in Syracuse, where he had once attempted to educate the young tyrant Dionysius II in philosophy, taught him the immense challenges of applying philosophical principles to real-world politics. Yet he remained steadfast in his belief that only a state led by philosophers trained in wisdom and virtue could achieve true justice. Thus, the academy became a cradle for training future leaders who would go on to shape the political landscape of Greece and beyond. One of the academy's most remarkable features was its extraordinary longevity. Unlike many philosophical schools that lasted only a short time or were limited to a single generation, the academy continued operating for nearly 900 years after Plato's death. It endured the upheavals of the Hellenistic period, the rise of the Roman Empire, and even the decline of ancient Greek culture. Throughout that time, the academy remained a beacon of intellectual light in the ancient world, attracting scholars from across Greece and distant lands. The academy's far-reaching influence on philosophy echoes across the centuries, and its legacy is still evident in modern universities and research institutes. Plato's vision for the academy was rooted in his passionate belief that knowledge and wisdom are the highest pursuits to which humans can aspire. Plato believed that the philosopher's mission was not only to understand the world, but also to improve it, applying reason and virtue to confront the challenges of human existence. The academy he founded was not merely a school, it was a community of brilliant minds united in the pursuit of truth and the betterment of society. With its special emphasis on dialogue, critical thinking, and the integration of diverse fields of study, the academy set a new standard for what higher education could achieve. The founding of the Academy marked the beginning of a new era in the history of philosophy and education. Plato's bold experiment, creating an intellectual community devoted to the search for truth, left an enduring mark on the development of Western thought. The Academy became a model for generations of scholars and educators, with its focus on mathematics, dialectics, and philosophical inquiry continuing to shape modern education. Through the Academy, Plato's ideas transcended the borders of ancient Athens, helping to define the intellectual landscape of the Western world for centuries to come. The Academy was not merely a place for acquiring knowledge, it was a space for reflection, questioning, and confronting the deepest issues about the nature of reality, justice, and human existence. Here, philosophy was not simply a subject of study, but a way of life. With the Academy, Plato left an immortal legacy, one that continues to inspire philosophers, educators, and thinkers to this very day. Part 6. The Theory of Forms and the Allegory of the Cave. The theory of forms is perhaps Plato's most profound and enduring contribution to philosophy. It is regarded as the pinnacle of his exploration into the nature of reality and knowledge, and forms the metaphysical foundation of his thought. This theory originates from a fundamental division between the material world, constantly changing and full of imperfections, and a higher immaterial realm where perfect and immutable forms or ideas exist. According to Plato, these forms are the true essence of all things, while the material world is merely a faint reflection, an incomplete imitation of this higher reality. Thus, the physical objects we perceive through our senses are not reality in the deepest sense of the word. They are temporary, fragile, and inherently flawed. What we see are only pale copies of the perfect forms, comprehensible to humans only through reason and profound intellectual contemplation. The development of the theory of forms did not occur by chance. It was influenced by many factors, including Plato's personal experiences and the intellectual traditions he encountered throughout his life. The philosophical teachings of Parmenides and the Eleatic school, which Plato studied closely during his travels, played a key role in shaping his ideas about eternity and immutability. Parmenides argued that true reality must be eternal and unchanging, while the world of appearances is merely an illusion, deceptive and elusive. This sharp distinction resonated deeply with Plato, who viewed the sensory world as fragile, unstable, and unworthy of complete trust, a realm where everything is in constant flux. Plato's dissatisfaction with the material world was also partly shaped by the profound influence of Socrates. In Plato's mind, Socrates spent his life questioning the nature of virtue, justice, and goodness. But he never constructed a complete metaphysical system to explain how these concepts exist in a world of change and imperfection. Plato took up this challenge, and the theory of forms was his answer to the question, how can humans grasp universal truths in a constantly shifting world? For Plato, the answer lay in the existence of a higher realm of reality, where perfect, immutable forms exist independently of the material world. In his philosophy, these forms are the ultimate reality, while everything in the material world is just a faint copy or incomplete expression of them. Take, for example, the concept of a circle. Any circle that exists in the physical world is flawed to some degree. A truly perfect circle exists only as an idea. No matter how carefully one draws it, every circle in the material world contains minor flaws or imperfections. Yet in our minds, we can still conceive of a perfectly ideal circle, absolutely symmetrical and strictly adhering to the rigorous definitions of geometry. Plato argued that this mental concept is not merely an abstraction, it is a reflection of a perfect form of the circle existing in the realm of forms. Similarly, every object in the material world, from trees and chairs to horses, has its own corresponding ideal form, a perfect version that exists independently of this physical world. For example, the shape of a tree is the perfect embodiment of the essence of treeness, while each individual tree in the material world is merely an imperfect copy of that shape. Plato believed that these forms not only truly exist, but are even more real than the tangible objects we see. According to him, the material world is the realm of phenomena where everything is born and dies, while the forms are eternal, unchanging, and absolutely complete. The shape of a tree, then, is the perfect representation of the idea of a tree, while each physical tree is merely an incomplete copy of that idea. Plato believed these forms were not only real, but possessed a higher degree of reality than visible objects. The material world is where phenomena arise and vanish, but the forms are eternal, immutable, and perfect. Because they represent the deepest essence of reality, knowledge of them is considered the highest form of knowledge. However, this kind of knowledge cannot be attained through the senses, which only reflect a world in perpetual change and imperfection. Instead, it is through intellect and deep contemplation that humans can grasp the eternal truths of the forms. Plato developed this doctrine in many philosophical dialogues, most notably in The Republic, where he introduced the famous allegory of the cave to illustrate the contrast between the phenomenal world and the world of ideas. In this allegory, humans are described as prisoners chained inside a dark cave, able to see only the shadows cast on the wall before them. These shadows symbolize the world of superficial images, the fleeting entities of the material realm. The prisoners mistake these shadows for the only reality, as they have never seen anything else. But one prisoner manages to break free from his chains and step outside the cave. At first, the sunlight blinds him, but as his eyes adjust, he begins to behold the real world for the first time. He sees the sun, the trees, the sky, the entire world in its fullness. This symbolizes the journey of the philosopher, who through reason and an unquenchable thirst for knowledge rises above the world of illusions to grasp the ultimate reality of the forms. The allegory of the cave not only reveals the distinction between the material realm and the realm of forms, but also emphasizes the arduous path to true knowledge. The philosopher is like the escaped prisoner undergoing a difficult process of enlightenment to emerge from the fog of ignorance. To achieve such understanding, the philosopher must break free from the temptations and illusions of the sensory world and focus on the eternal truths that lie deep within. For Plato, this is not merely an intellectual journey, but also a moral and spiritual transformation. When the philosopher fully comprehends the essence of justice, virtue, and the good, he attains the highest level of awareness. In Plato's system, the form of the good occupies the supreme position, like the sun in his allegory, illuminating all things and making knowledge possible. The good illuminates the world of forms, granting them intelligibility and existence. Plato describes the good as an entity beyond all being, a supreme reality toward which the philosopher must strive. Knowledge of the good is the ultimate goal, as it enables the philosopher not only to understand the structure of reality, but also to grasp the moral principles needed to guide human life. Plato's theory of forms emphasizes that everything in the material world is merely an imperfect copy of the perfect forms. The form of justice serves as the absolute standard by which all actions are judged, and the form of beauty represents the pure essence that all physical beauty merely reflects. By understanding the forms, especially the form of the good, humans can live more virtuously and justly, guided by knowledge of what truly matters. However, this doctrine has been the subject of much debate. Aristotle, Plato's student, rejected the idea of separating the world into two realms.
He argued that forms do not exist independently, but are inseparable from the objects in the real world, and that humans can attain knowledge through natural observation without invoking a metaphysical realm.
Nevertheless, Plato's theory has had a profound influence on Western philosophy, from Plotinus and the Neoplatonists to modern thinkers such as Immanuel Kant and Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. It also shaped Plato's views on education, art, and the role of philosophers in society. Plato believed that only those who had attained knowledge of the forms, especially the good, were fit to rule.
The philosopher king is the symbol of the union between wisdom and virtue, a political ideal both enduring and controversial throughout history.
Plato also criticized art, arguing that it merely imitates the material world, which is itself already a copy of the realm of forms, thus placing art even further from truth. This view later influenced philosophers like Kant, who also grappled with the relationship between art and truth. The allegory of the cave remains Plato's most vivid and enduring image, depicting the harsh struggle to break free from illusion and attain true knowledge. It illustrates the limits of perception, the power of enlightenment, and the sacred mission of the philosopher, not only to reach the truth himself, but also to return and guide others out of the darkness. When the freed prisoner returns to the cave and tries to share his knowledge with those still chained, they do not believe him. On the contrary, they ridicule and even resist his attempts to enlighten them. They have grown too accustomed and attached to the darkness to imagine that a higher reality exists. Plato uses this part of the allegory to reflect the opposition philosophers often face when they challenge entrenched beliefs and conventional thinking.
Most people prefer to remain in ignorance and are often hostile toward those who shatter their comforting illusions. This part of the allegory echoes Plato's own experience of Socrates' trial and execution, where Socrates was condemned merely for questioning the moral and political foundations of Athenian society. The allegory of the cave is not just a story about the search for knowledge, but also a reflection on the nature of education and the philosopher's role in society.
For Plato, true education is not simply the transfer of information into the mind, but the guiding of the human soul toward the light of truth. The philosopher has a duty to illuminate the path for others, helping them leave the darkness and move toward the real world.
This journey is revolutionary. It requires not only intellectual effort, but also moral and spiritual awakening. Plato's allegory carries profound ethical implications. He believed that only through knowledge of the good could the philosopher possess the qualities necessary to lead society and make decisions that promote justice and the common good.
The philosopher king, having escaped the cave and seen the true nature of reality, is the ideal ruler, one not driven by personal desire or hunger for power, but guided by an understanding of what is right and just.
In the Republic, Plato contrasts the philosopher king with the tyrant one, swept away by ambition and lacking the wisdom to rule fairly. This allegory serves as a sharp critique of political systems rooted in ignorance and self-interest rather than wisdom and justice. On a broader level, it reflects the human condition and the challenges of seeking truth in a world that resists it.
The image of prisoners chained in darkness is a powerful metaphor for the limits of human perception and the struggle to break free from surrounding illusions. Plato believed that most people are content to live in the superficial world, never venturing beyond their comfort zones to explore deeper realities. In contrast, the philosopher is the one who dares to question appearances and pursue truth no matter how arduous the journey may be. The cave allegory has echoed through generations of thinkers, becoming central to debates on philosophy, education, and politics. The shadows and illusions within the cave have often been used to illustrate humanity's difficulty in distinguishing reality from falsehood. This allegory has also been interpreted in various ways, from critiques of political power and authority to reflections on the nature of consciousness and the limits of human understanding. A recurring theme in Plato's philosophy is the contrast between appearance and reality. The material world is the realm of constantly changing, decaying phenomena, while true reality is eternal, immutable, and accessible only through reason. The philosopher, by turning away from the superficial world to focus on the realm of forms, can grasp the deeper essence of reality and attain knowledge of the good. This distinction between appearance and reality has become a major concern in Western philosophy, leaving a profound legacy from René Descartes and Immanuel Kant to contemporary thinkers. The cave allegory also raises essential questions about power and leadership. Plato believed that only those who hold knowledge of truth are fit to lead society. Yet this poses the question of how such individuals can gain power in a world dominated by ignorance and self-interest. The allegory captures the tension between the yearning for truth and the complex demands of political life, a theme that has haunted political philosophy from Plato's time to the present. Ultimately, the allegory of the cave remains a powerful and enduring image of the human condition, challenging us to reflect on the nature of reality, knowledge, and education. It reminds us that the pursuit of truth is never easy, and those who seek to enlighten others often face resistance and even hostility. Yet it also affirms that true knowledge is possible, and the journey from the darkness of ignorance to the light of understanding is among the most profound and transformative experiences humans can undertake. Through this allegory, Plato invites us to break the chains of illusion and seek the higher truths that lie beyond the superficial world. Part 7. The Ideal State in the Republic. One of his most influential works, Plato sketches the vision of an ideal state where justice, wisdom, and reason serve as the supreme guiding principles of governance. Plato's model of the ideal state stems from his deep conviction that most people lack the capacity to make wise decisions in managing society. In his view, they are driven by desires, emotions, and ignorance rather than guided by reason. This conviction was reinforced by his profound disillusionment with Athenian democracy, particularly after witnessing the unjust trial and death of his great teacher Socrates. In stark contrast to that democratic system, Plato envisioned a different kind of political structure. In Plato's vision, power should be entrusted to those individuals who are both the wisest and most virtuous, the philosopher kings, to ensure that all decisions are illuminated by wisdom and serve the common good, rather than being distorted by personal ambition or the fickleness of the masses. At the heart of this political model lies the concept of justice, a notion that Plato thoroughly explores throughout the Republic. For him, justice in society mirrors justice within the individual, where reason assumes the dominant role, restraining and harmonizing desires and emotions. An ideal state, according to Plato, must be governed by those possessing superior intellect and sharp rationality. In this profound vision, he divides society into three distinct classes, each reflecting a different part of the human soul's structure and bearing a unique role in the state's machinery. These three classes include the ruling class, the philosophers, the auxiliaries, the warriors, and the producing class, farmers, artisans, and merchants. In Plato's ideal state, the philosopher kings occupy the highest position, representing the rational and enlightened part of the soul. From a young age, they are rigorously trained to pursue truth and attain knowledge of the forms, especially the form of the good. This foundation equips them with the wisdom and virtue necessary to govern with absolute justice.
Uninfluenced by personal ambition, these rulers focus solely on protecting and enhancing the collective welfare of the entire state. Plato firmly believed that only those who have grasped the eternal truths are worthy of making decisions that serve the highest interests of all citizens. Thus, the philosopher kings are the living embodiment of reason and intellect, and their leadership ensures that the entire state operates under principles of justice and prioritizes the common good. The second class in Plato's ideal state is the auxiliaries, symbolizing the spirited part of the soul. These are the valiant warriors and guardians tasked with maintaining social order, defending the state from external threats, and enforcing the laws enacted by the philosopher kings. The auxiliaries must possess qualities such as courage, strict discipline, and unwavering loyalty to the state. However, unlike the philosopher kings, they do not possess the same depth of philosophical understanding. Nevertheless, they are trained to recognize and respect the authority of the philosopher kings and to understand that their mission is to support the rulers in upholding justice and preserving the integrity of the state. In this way, the auxiliaries maintain stability and security, enabling the philosopher kings to govern with philosophical wisdom. The third class, the largest in Plato's model, is the producers, symbolizing the appetitive part of the human soul. They are responsible for meeting the economic needs of society, including agriculture, craftsmanship, and trade. Unlike the philosophers or auxiliaries, the producers are not concerned with the pursuit of knowledge or the protection of the state. Instead, they focus on satisfying the material needs of the community. Though governed by desire, Plato emphasizes that their role is essential, as they provide the resources and services that sustain life and well-being for all citizens. The key to building a just state, according to Plato, is that each class must fulfill its assigned role and work in harmony with the others. This reflects the core principle of specialization. Each class focuses exclusively on its own duties and refrains from interfering in the functions of the other classes. For example, the producing class must not participate in governance, and likewise the philosopher kings should not be drawn into economic activities. Only then can the state operate smoothly, effectively, and justly. Plato believed that each class in society need only focus on fulfilling its own duties, thereby contributing to the collective good of the whole. This principle of specialization reflects his broader philosophical view. Justice is achieved when each part of a whole performs its natural role. Just as a just soul is one where reason governs and regulates desires, a just state is maintained when philosopher kings rule, auxiliaries protect security, and the producing class provides for material needs. Plato's emphasis on the central role of philosopher kings stems from his belief that wisdom and knowledge are the essential qualities of a ruler. In the Republic, he argued that most people are driven by personal desires and easily overwhelmed by emotions, rendering them incapable of governing effectively. Distrustful of the Athenian democracy, where power resided in the hands of an ignorant majority, Plato proposed a political system where authority is entrusted to those who truly possess knowledge. According to his philosophy, only those who have deeply studied the forms and understood the essence of justice and the good are worthy of making decisions for the benefit of the entire state, rather than serving narrow interests or factions. To prepare for this immense responsibility, Plato envisioned a rigorous educational system beginning in childhood and lasting throughout life. This program included physical training, music, mathematics, and philosophy, all designed to cultivate both mind and body, preparing philosopher kings to rule with wisdom. The final stage of this training was dialectic, a form of deep philosophical reasoning and dialogue that led them to discover truth.
Only those who successfully completed this demanding education and demonstrated intellectual ability and virtue would be deemed fit to become philosopher kings. In this way, Plato sought to create a ruling class not only endowed with knowledge, but also imbued with ethics and a commitment to the common good. One of the most controversial aspects of Plato's ideal state is his bold proposal to abolish private property and family ties among the ruling class. He argued that personal wealth and familial relationships breed conflicts of interest and foster selfishness, elements that could undermine the philosopher king's ability to govern justly. By eliminating these sources of division, Plato believed the rulers could devote themselves entirely to serving the interests of the state, free from distractions of personal gain. In this vision, philosopher kings and their auxiliaries would live communally, sharing property and responsibilities, forming a unified group unburdened by material desires or private attachments. In contrast, the producing class would still be allowed to own property and maintain families, as they do not hold governing power. This revolutionary proposal reflects Plato's unwavering belief that the state's welfare must be prioritized above individual ambitions, especially for those entrusted with authority. The ideal state described by Plato in the Republic is not merely a political vision of justice, but also a profound reflection of his metaphysical and ethical views. The philosopher kings, the supreme rulers, symbolize the triumph of reason over base desires and emotions, while the state itself becomes a mirror of a harmonious soul guided by rationality. In this way, Plato's ideal state is not just a governance model, but also a moral ideal. A society where justice is cherished and preserved by those who have grasped its true essence. However, from Plato's time to the present day, this vision has sparked intense debate. Critics argue that the notion of a society ruled by philosopher kings is inherently undemocratic and elitist, concentrating power in the hands of a small group of intellectuals who are not chosen by the people. Others have pointed out that Plato's rigid division of society into fixed classes seems overly hierarchical, offering little room for social mobility or the possibility that individuals from lower classes might rise through merit and ability to positions of leadership. Furthermore, Plato's rejection of private property and family ties among the ruling class is often seen as a severe infringement on personal freedom, denying some of humanity's most basic aspirations and needs. Plato's vision of an ideal state has left a profound mark on political philosophy and remains at the center of many discussions and debates. His emphasis on wisdom and virtue in governance has inspired countless thinkers from antiquity to the present. His critiques of democracy also resonate in contemporary discussions about the role of expertise and knowledge in political decision-making. Though Plato's ideal state has never been realized, it endures as a powerful philosophical model for reflecting on the relationship between governance, justice, and the good life. Beyond its political implications, Plato's vision raises deep ethical questions. What is the true nature of justice, and how should each individual's role in society be defined? For Plato, justice is not merely about rights or individual freedom, but about organizing society so that everyone can fulfill the roles suited to their nature. This idea challenges modern conceptions of justice, which often emphasize autonomy and individual equality, and raises the question, can justice exist without a collective understanding of ultimate goodness? Plato's ideal state reflects his deep belief that the pursuit of truth and wisdom is the highest goal of human life. He imagined a society ruled by the wisest and most virtuous individuals, aiming to ensure that justice prevails and every citizen has the opportunity to live a good and fulfilling life. Though many regard this vision as utopian, even unattainable, it continues to ignite debates about the nature of justice, the role of education, and the responsibilities of those in power. Part 8, Critique of Democracy. Plato's disillusionment with Athenian democracy profoundly shaped his political philosophy and his vision of the ideal state. His criticisms of democracy became a central theme in the Republic, where he systematically analyzed the shortcomings of this form of government and proposed an alternative, the rule of philosopher kings.
Plato's personal experiences amidst the political chaos in Athens, particularly the trial and tragic death of Socrates, left a deep mark on his thinking. Deeply influenced by these experiences, Plato came to view democracy not as a symbol of freedom and equality, but as a flawed system where the incompetent and self-serving could easily come to power. To Plato, democracy represented a dangerous form of rule that could lead to chaos, instability, and eventually slide into tyranny. His critique stemmed from a fundamental belief that most people lack the knowledge, experience, and wisdom necessary to govern a just and orderly society. In a democracy, power is given to the majority people who, in Plato's view, often lack the understanding and rationality to make sound decisions. He regarded the assumption that all individuals possess equal capacity to rule as a dangerously false notion. In the Republic, Plato compared democracy to a ship, where the crew elects a captain even if that person knows nothing about the art of navigation. Just as such a ship would inevitably go astray and sink a nation, placing its fate in the hands of an unwise crowd is bound to descend into chaos and corruption. According to Plato, the greatest flaw of democracy lies in its worship of freedom over wisdom and order. In a democratic state, people are allowed to pursue their own desires and interests without regard for the collective good. This unrestrained freedom, he argued, inevitably leads to the breakdown of social and political order, as citizens lose their sense of reason, causing society to decay rather than uphold justice. From Plato's perspective, democracy is vulnerable to demagogues and cunning leaders who exploit the emotions of the masses to manipulate public opinion, seize power, and then covertly pursue their own selfish goals. Plato believed that such leaders would eventually exploit democracy's inherent weaknesses to establish a tyranny. He argued that unchecked freedom in a democratic society fuels the desire for stronger, more authoritarian control, especially as chaos becomes unavoidable. Plato's concerns about the potential dangers of democracy arose directly from his experience of Athens's political instability after the Peloponnesian War. In 404 BCE, Athens's defeat by Sparta paved the way for the brief but brutal rule of the 30 Tyrants, a notorious oligarchic regime known for its bloody purges of democratic leaders and supporters. Although this regime was quickly overthrown and democracy restored, Athens's political atmosphere remained rife with division and instability. Most notably, the trial and execution of Socrates in 399 BCE by a democratic court became a crucial turning point for Plato. He saw this event as clear evidence that democracy not only failed to safeguard justice, but could also be swayed by the passions and prejudices of the majority, leading to the suppression of those who dared to challenge the existing order. In the Republic, Plato outlined the decline of political systems, beginning with the ideal aristocracy and ending with the rise of tyranny. He described 5 forms of government: aristocracy, timocracy, oligarchy, democracy, and tyranny. Aristocratus, where the best individuals rule based on wisdom and justice, is the ideal model. Next comes timocracy, which prioritizes honor and military strength. Though closer to the ideal, it is inferior because it is driven by ambition rather than pure reason. Oligarchy arises when the desire to accumulate wealth overshadows the ideal of honor, causing the government to serve only the interests of the rich while neglecting the poor. Democracy emerges when the people rise against the injustices of oligarchy, demanding freedom and equality.
But according to Plato, the excessive emphasis on liberty and personal interests ultimately plunges society into disorder, as each individual places their own desires above the collective needs of the community. This chaos creates fertile ground for a strong leader to rise, promising to restore order. However, the result is the emergence of a tyrant, one who consolidates power through fear and oppression. Plato's critique of democracy was not merely a rejection of the system that existed in Athens, but also a deeper reflection on human nature and the challenges of sustaining a just society. He believed that most people are driven more by desires and passions than by reason and virtue, a tendency that in a democratic society would only accelerate the collapse of order. In a system where power is distributed equally among all citizens, the most basic human desires are allowed to manifest freely, leading to the decline of moral and social order, if not guided by a wise and virtuous ruler. Plato argued that democracy inevitably runs the risk of transforming into tyranny, as the people are easily swept away by a demagogue, someone who promises to fulfill all their desires while secretly consolidating absolute power for themselves. Plato also believed that democracy fosters a false sense of equality. Although it appears to give every citizen an equal voice in governing the state, he warned that this kind of equality is superficial because it ignores the profound differences in ability and virtue among individuals. In the Republic, Plato emphasized the necessity of specialization, asserting that just as people are suited for different roles in society according to their innate talents, not everyone has the capacity to be a leader. The idea that anyone can rule regardless of their intellectual or moral qualifications was to Plato one of democracy's greatest dangers. He believed that true justice could only exist when power was entrusted to those genuinely equipped to wield it rightly, namely philosopher kings, individuals who had undergone rigorous training in the pursuit of truth and understood the essence of the highest good. One of Plato's strongest criticisms of democracy is that it encourages a culture of individualism and self-interest. In a democratic society, each person is free to pursue personal goals and ambitions with little regard for the common good. This freedom, though seemingly appealing at first glance, easily leads to the erosion of discipline and self-restraint, as people become obsessed with their own pleasures and passions rather than their responsibilities to the community. Plato viewed this unrestrained freedom as a recipe for chaos, as it weakens the social fabric and undermines the moral values necessary to sustain a just and stable society. In the Republic, he likened democracy to a multicolored cloak, a symbol of diversity and vibrancy, but lacking unity and a shared purpose. The excessive glorification of individual freedom, according to Plato, ultimately leads to anarchy, where everyone acts on their whims and no one cares for the collective welfare. To him, the remedy for democracy's flaws was the establishment of a just and rational government led by philosopher kings, leaders who had attained knowledge of the forms and the ultimate good, and who were capable of making decisions that would promote the common welfare rather than serving the interests of a particular class or faction. Unlike democratic leaders who are often swayed by public opinion and personal ambitions, philosopher kings are guided by a deep commitment to justice and the common good. In the ideal state that Plato describes in the Republic, each individual fulfills the role most suited to their abilities, and power is entrusted only to those possessing the qualities necessary to govern wisely and justly. Plato's sharp critiques of democracy have left a lasting mark on the history of political thought, sparking debates between those who praise him for his keen insights into the dangers of demagoguery and the fragility of democratic systems, and those who criticize him for his elitist and stringent approach. While many admire Plato's vision, others fault him for his elitism and his clear rejection of political equality. The concept of philosopher kings, while theoretically compelling, has been viewed as unrealistic and anti-democratic because it places absolute power in the hands of an unelected few, presuming that philosophers, by virtue of their superior intellect, are immune to the corrupting influence of power. Nonetheless, Plato's warnings about the perils of democracy remain relevant in today's political discourse. He pointed out the threat of demagogues, the susceptibility of the public to manipulation, and the difficulties of maintaining order and justice in a democratic society, issues that still resonate strongly in modern democracies. Today, the balance between individual freedom and the collective good remains a central question, and ensuring that those in power are guided by wisdom and morality rather than personal ambition is still a primary concern. Plato's critique invites us to reflect deeply on the nature of political power and the responsibility of each citizen in safeguarding a democratic society. While democracy promises freedom and equality, it also demands a great deal from its citizens to engage in political decisions with reason and understanding. Plato's emphasis on education and the cultivation of intellect serves as a reminder that the success of a democracy relies not only on its institutional structures, but also on the moral and intellectual qualities of its citizens. In this sense, his critique is not merely a rejection of democracy, but a call to build a fairer and more enlightened society. Ultimately, Plato's warnings compel us to rethink the nature of power, the role of wisdom in governance, and the fragile relationship between liberty and justice. Though the idea of philosopher kings may seem distant in the context of modern politics, Plato's concerns about unrestrained freedom, the rise of demagogues, and the urgent need for wise and virtuous leadership continue to echo in contemporary debates about the future of democracy. Part 9. Plato's Dialogues. Plato's philosophical legacy is incredibly rich and diverse, but the majority of his works are presented in the form of dialogues, a unique literary style in which characters engage in lively debates about central philosophical questions. These dialogues are not merely transcripts of Socrates' conversations. They are layered texts that reflect the development of Plato's thought and his intellectual journey through topics such as ethics, politics, metaphysics, and epistemology. Through the dialogues, Plato conveys philosophical arguments in an engaging and accessible way, while simultaneously stimulating critical thinking in readers. By using the dialogue form, Plato captures the very spirit of philosophical inquiry, a dynamic process where questioning, debating, and exploring gradually reveal profound truths. A distinctive feature of most of his dialogues is the presence of Socrates, who plays a central role as the leader of the discussions. Although Socrates himself never wrote down his teachings, Plato immortalized his teacher by making him the soul of many works, transforming Socrates into the spokesperson for his own philosophical ideas. Within these dialogues, Socrates employs his characteristic method of questioning, a probing technique, to uncover the beliefs and assumptions of others. Each dialogue often begins with a seemingly simple question, such as, "What is justice?" or "What is virtue?" and then unfolds into a series of deep arguments where Socrates gradually exposes contradictions and weaknesses in his interlocutor's reasoning. This approach, known as the elenchus, is not only the foundation of Socratic philosophy, but also serves as a sharp tool through which Plato communicates his philosophical reflections. In his philosophical exploration, the structure of the dialogues reflects Plato's profound belief that philosophy is not about arriving at absolute answers or dogmatic truths, but rather about an ongoing quest. Plato deliberately avoids providing definitive conclusions in many of his dialogues. Instead, he leaves readers with more questions at the end of the conversations. This open-ended approach lies at the heart of the dialogue form. It encourages reflection and invites readers to challenge their own beliefs and assumptions. For Plato, the true value of philosophy lies not in possessing knowledge, but in the steadfast pursuit of understanding. The Republic is perhaps Plato's most famous dialogue, showcasing his distinctive philosophical style. The work is constructed as a conversation between Socrates and several other figures, including Glaucon and Adeimantus, as they explore the nature of justice and the model of the ideal state. Through this dialogue, Plato introduces key concepts, such as the theory of forms, the allegory of the cave, and the image of the philosopher king, along with many other foundational ideas. The Republic stands out for its depth and breadth, covering topics ranging from ethics, politics, and education to metaphysics, yet always circling back to the central question, what makes for a just and virtuous life? Its complexity and richness have made it one of the most studied and debated texts in the history of Western philosophy. Another equally important dialogue is Phaedo, in which Plato examines the nature of the soul and the question of immortality. Set on the day of Socrates' execution, Phaedo recounts the final conversation between Socrates and his disciples about the fate of the soul after death. Socrates offers various arguments to demonstrate that the soul is immortal and eternal, akin to the forms. This dialogue is not only a metaphysical exploration, but also a poignant portrayal of Socrates' calmness and courage as he prepares to drink the hemlock that will end his life. Through these dialogues, Plato leads readers deep into questions about life, death, and human nature, while simultaneously portraying the philosopher as someone in relentless pursuit of truth, not only in life, but even in the face of death. The Symposium is another of Plato's great dialogues focusing on the nature of love and beauty. Set during a banquet, characters such as Socrates, Aristophanes, and the playwright Agathon each present their perspectives on eros, love. Each speaker contributes a different angle, ranging from physical desire to profound spiritual longing. Yet it is Socrates who leaves the deepest impression as he shares profound insights handed down from the mysterious figure Diotima, who transformed his understanding of love. Plato's philosophical legacy is immensely rich and diverse, but most of his works are presented in the form of dialogues, a unique literary style in which characters engage in spirited debates around fundamental philosophical questions. These dialogues are not merely records of Socratic conversations, they are multi-layered texts that reflect Plato's evolving thought and his intellectual journey into ethics, politics, metaphysics, and epistemology. Through these dialogues, Plato delivers philosophical arguments in a compelling and accessible way, while inspiring readers to think critically. By employing the dialogue form, Plato fully captures the spirit of philosophical inquiry, a dynamic process in which questioning, debating, and exploration gradually uncover profound truths. A distinctive feature of most of these dialogues is the presence of Socrates, who plays the central role and guides the discussions. Though Socrates never wrote down his own teachings, Plato immortalized his mentor by making him the soul of many works, transforming Socrates into the mouthpiece for his own philosophical ideas. In these dialogues, Socrates frequently uses his characteristic method of questioning, a probing technique designed to expose others' beliefs and assumptions. Each conversation often begins with a seemingly simple question, such as, "What is justice?" or "What is virtue?" then develops into a series of deep reflections, where Socrates gradually reveals contradictions and gaps in his interlocutor's reasoning. This approach, known as elenchus, not only forms the foundation of Socratic philosophy, but also serves as a powerful tool for Plato to convey his own philosophical explorations. Love, virtue, and the cosmos. In the Symposium, Plato describes love as a ladder which the soul climbs by starting with an attraction to physical beauty, then ascending to the contemplation of the form of beauty itself. For Plato, love is not merely a physical or emotional experience. It is a powerful spiritual force that compels the soul toward ultimate knowledge and the vision of eternal, unchanging beauty. The symposium is both a celebration of love and a profound meditation on the philosophical nature of desire and the quest for truth. In Meno, Plato asks whether virtue can be taught. The dialogue begins with Meno questioning Socrates about the teachability of virtue, and Socrates responds by challenging Meno's assumptions about the very definition of virtue. Through this exchange, Socrates introduces the theory of recollection, the idea that learning is essentially the process of remembering knowledge the soul possessed in previous lives. This theory ties into Plato's larger metaphysical view of the soul's immortality and the existence of forms. Meno also introduces the Socratic paradox, the recognition that true knowledge begins with admitting one's own ignorance. This paradox became a cornerstone of Socratic philosophy, emphasizing humility and self-examination in the pursuit of wisdom. The Timaeus is one of Plato's most enigmatic and cosmological dialogues, where he offers a detailed account of the creation of the universe. In this dialogue, the character Timaeus presents a vision of the cosmos as a logical and ordered structure crafted by a divine artisan or creator. The work explores Plato's ideas about the nature of the material world, the essential role of mathematics in explaining the universe, and the relationship between the physical and the eternal. Timaeus holds special importance because of its profound influence on later scientific and philosophical thought, particularly in conceiving the universe as a system governed by rational principles and mathematical harmony. Unlike many of Plato's other works which focus on ethics and politics, this dialogue reflects his deep concern with the nature of reality and the origins of the world. Law, governance, and practical philosophy. In his later dialogues, The Laws offers a more practical and detailed vision of political management compared to the idealized society of the Republic. In The Laws, Plato acknowledges that the concept of a philosopher king might be an unattainable ideal and proposes a more pragmatic approach to building a just society. This work is structured as a conversation between an Athenian stranger and two other characters in which they discuss laws and the institutions necessary to sustain an orderly and stable state. Unlike the Republic, which imagines a utopian society ruled by philosophers, The Laws focuses more on designing a system of governance that can adapt to human weaknesses and imperfections. Here, Plato underscores the crucial role of law as a guiding force, ensuring social order and upholding justice. Although The Laws is often seen as more conservative and less idealistic than the Republic, it marks an important evolution in Plato's thinking about politics and statecraft. These dialogues are not merely philosophical texts. They are also masterful literary works that are both persuasive and thought-provoking. Dialogue as a philosophical and literary art. Plato's choice of the dialogue form allowed him to create deeply layered works populated with rich and diverse characters, each bringing their own voice and perspective. Through these figures, Plato could explore multiple viewpoints on the same issue, thereby inviting readers to engage with the arguments and think critically about the ideas presented. These dialogues are infused with drama, humor, and irony, making them not only intellectually stimulating, but also highly engaging. Socrates often serves as the central figure, at once teacher and provocateur, constantly challenging interlocutors to question their beliefs and guiding them to deeper levels of reflection. Plato's dialogues also reflect his strong belief in dialectic, the process of rational debate and exchange, which he regarded as the highest form of philosophical inquiry. For Plato, philosophy was not a solitary endeavor, but a social activity, nurtured through dialogue and the exchange of ideas. The structure of these works is designed to pull readers into the discussion, inviting them to participate in the philosophical flow and to challenge their own assumptions. This emphasis on dialogue and questioning mirrors Plato's conviction that truth cannot simply be handed down from teacher to student, but must be discovered through critical thought and self-examination. A timeless legacy. Though the content of Plato's dialogues spans ethics, politics, metaphysics, and cosmology, they all revolve around a central theme: the quest for truth and the pursuit of wisdom. These works encourage readers to reflect on the most fundamental questions of human existence. What is true justice? What is the nature of virtue? What is the shape of reality? How should we live our lives? These questions remain as relevant as ever and continue to inspire generations of philosophers, scholars, and students to embark on their own relentless pursuit of knowledge. Plato's dialogues also attest to his profound belief in the transformative power of philosophy. For Plato, philosophy was not just an intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a practice that shapes how we think, act, and engage with the world around us. These conversations illustrate how Socrates, through sharp questioning and reasoning, led his interlocutors to deeper insights about themselves and the cosmos. In this way, Plato's works are not merely philosophical texts, but an invitation for us to embark on the philosophical journey, a quest for truth and a life illuminated by reason and wisdom. In conclusion, Plato's dialogues are regarded as some of the most important and influential works in the history of Western philosophy. Through the dialogue form, Plato transformed philosophy into a journey that is both intellectual and deeply human. Plato was able to delve into a vast array of philosophical questions with both rigor and accessibility, sparking critical thought and inviting readers to engage with the ideas he presented. His dialogues are filled with diverse characters, dramatic debates, and profound layers of meaning, making them not only timeless philosophical classics, but also celebrated literary masterpieces. Through these dialogues, Plato invites us to walk alongside him in the quest for truth, to question our own assumptions, and to seek wisdom in a world full of uncertainty. Part 10. Plato's influence on Aristotle. One of the most remarkable and influential intellectual relationships in history is the bond between Plato and his brilliant student, Aristotle. Aristotle joined Plato's academy as a young man around 367 BCE and remained there for nearly 20 years. During this time, he absorbed much of Plato's philosophy, but later diverged to develop his own unique system of thought, challenging and expanding on many of his teacher's ideas. The philosophical flow from Socrates to Plato and then to Aristotle laid a solid foundation for Western thought, demonstrating how philosophy continually evolves across generations by questioning and refining prior ideas. At the heart of the relationship between Plato and Aristotle was a shared concern for fundamental philosophical questions about the nature of reality, ethics, politics, and the human soul. Both were eager to explore the world systematically and rationally. Yet, despite this shared aspiration, Aristotle disagreed with many of Plato's core ideas. In particular, he rejected the theory of forms, and this disagreement highlights an important principle of philosophy: engaging in critical debate even with the ideas of those we deeply respect. Plato's theory of forms posited that the material world is only a pale shadow, a mere imitation of a higher immaterial realm where perfect eternal forms exist. For example, every horse we see is merely an imperfect version of the ideal form of horse. Every just action reflects incompletely the pure form of justice. For Plato, these forms are the ultimate reality, while the material world merely reflects these unchanging truths. However, Aristotle saw flaws in this metaphysical system.
He argued that Plato's separation of the material world from the world of forms created an unnecessary divide, isolating experience from reality. According to Aristotle, forms do not exist in some distant realm, but are embedded within the objects themselves. The essence of a horse or a just action can be found in reality, not in abstract concepts.
Aristotle maintained that true knowledge must come from direct observation of the natural world through experience and empirical investigation, rather than abstract contemplation of forms. This rejection of Plato's theory marked a major turning point, initiating a new philosophical approach that emphasized the role of empirical evidence and direct observation in understanding the world.
Aristotle's focus on empirical study is evident in his works on biology and natural sciences. While Plato was mainly concerned with metaphysical questions and abstract realms of ideas, Aristotle devoted much effort to exploring the natural world. He systematically observed and classified plants and animals, laying the groundwork for later scientific methods.
Prioritizing the study of the material world over seeking truth in a higher realm represented a profound shift in philosophical thinking, deeply influencing the development of science. This approach also extended into Aristotle's views on ethics, politics, and metaphysics. He always sought to construct theories grounded in reality, human experience, and natural order. Even when disagreeing with his teacher, Aristotle expressed deep respect for Plato and acknowledged his profound impact on his intellectual journey. In metaphysics, Aristotle refers to Plato as the one I love and respect before offering his candid critiques, reflecting a complex relationship of both admiration and philosophical opposition. Although Aristotle challenged many of Plato's foundational arguments, he still used them as a starting point to build his own philosophy. For example, instead of accepting the theory of forms, Aristotle developed the concepts of essence and form, where form is the principle that gives matter its shape and purpose. In this way, he adapted and transformed Plato's ideas to fit the philosophical system he pursued. In ethics, Aristotle's approach was also more practical and human-centered. Unlike Plato, who believed that understanding the forms, especially the form of the good, was the key to living virtuously, Aristotle emphasized that virtue is formed through practical wisdom and habit. In Nicomachean Ethics, he explained that living virtuously involves finding the mean between two extremes, a concept cultivated through practice rather than achieved by contemplating abstract truths. This emphasis on practical wisdom and experience marked a shift away from Plato's idealistic and intellectual approach. Aristotle's political views also differed significantly. While Plato in The Republic envisioned an ideal state ruled by philosopher kings and rigid social classes, Aristotle took a more pragmatic path. In politics, he argued that the best form of government is one that can be flexibly adjusted to meet the needs and context of a particular society. Aristotle rejected the idea of a universal ideal state applicable to all times and places, and was skeptical of Plato's notion of philosopher kings. Instead, he proposed a mixed constitution, balancing the interests of the rich and the poor to maintain justice and stability through moderation. This pragmatic and adaptive perspective reflects Aristotle's broader view: political systems must emerge from the nature and realities of human society. One point Aristotle strongly opposed was Plato's vision of communal living for the ruling class. Plato had suggested that philosopher kings and soldiers should live without private property or families to avoid conflicts of interest and ensure absolute loyalty to the state. By contrast, Aristotle argued that this was an unrealistic ideal, contrary to human nature. He maintained that owning property and maintaining family life were necessary for people to flourish, and that imposing communal living would undermine the stability and happiness of the ruling class. Aristotle believed that the pursuit of individual happiness and prosperity was a core element in building a virtuous life. He saw Plato's notion of abandoning private property and family as an unnecessary constraint that could even backfire by restricting personal freedom. Despite these differences, Aristotle's philosophy remained deeply influenced by Plato in many respects. The concept of telos, the ultimate purpose of things, in Aristotle's philosophy is closely related to Plato's idea of forms. Both believed that everything in existence has a purpose or ideal pattern toward which it strives. For Aristotle, understanding the essence of something requires first grasping the purpose it serves. This perspective became a cornerstone of his ethical, metaphysical, and biological thought. In this way, Aristotle inherited Plato's ideas but transformed them into a more practical system grounded in observation and experience. The intellectual relationship between Plato and Aristotle is a vivid example of philosophy's dynamic nature. Each generation builds on the discoveries of the previous one, refining and expanding them to address new questions and challenges. Aristotle's influence did not end with his critiques of Plato. His own philosophical system dominated Western thought for centuries. While Plato's views resonated strongly during his lifetime and in the early centuries after his death, Aristotle's works became foundational for medieval scholasticism and played a central role in the development of Western logic, science, and ethics. His methodology, emphasizing empirical observation combined with logical reasoning, laid the groundwork for the modern scientific method. His ethical and political theories continued to exert a profound influence on thinkers during the Renaissance and Enlightenment. Centuries after their deaths, both Plato and Aristotle are still revered as two of the greatest figures of ancient Greek philosophy. The intellectual rivalry between them, born from deep respect but shaped by major philosophical differences, helped chart the course of Western philosophy and continues to influence debates on metaphysics, ethics, politics, and science to this day. Plato's idealism, with its focus on eternal and unchanging forms, profoundly impacted thinkers like Augustine and Kant. Meanwhile, Aristotle's empirical approach, emphasizing the material world, laid the foundations for the development of natural science and modern philosophy. Their influence is not only present in shaping Western thought, but also resonates in ongoing philosophical debates, where these two contrasting approaches continue to open distinct paths for exploring the world. Plato's emphasis on abstract reasoning and the pursuit of eternal truth, together with Aristotle's focus on practical observation and applied wisdom for living virtuously, created two great traditions that have shaped the intellectual foundations of the West. These currents continue to inspire new generations of philosophers, scientists, and scholars. It can be said that the relationship between Plato and Aristotle is one of the most important and productive intellectual connections in the history of philosophy. Aristotle's criticisms of Plato's views, especially the theory of forms, led him to construct his own philosophical system, emphasizing empirical observation and practical wisdom. Despite their differences, the intellectual legacies of both thinkers continue to shape how we think about the world and humanity's role within it. Their contributions to metaphysics, ethics, politics, and science have left an enduring impact, becoming central to philosophical discourse even today. The intellectual dialogue between Plato and Aristotle serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of continually questioning and refining ideas, even those that seem most revered, so that each generation can deepen and expand its understanding of the world. Part 11. Plato's Legacy. The legacy Plato left behind is immense, continuing to exert profound influence on philosophy, politics, education, and countless other fields of thought to this day. His works laid the firm foundation for Western philosophy, establishing ideas that generations of thinkers have explored, debated, and reinterpreted over the centuries. The academy he founded in 387 BCE is considered the first university in the Western world, becoming a model for future educational institutions and intellectual centers. Yet far beyond the academy's direct influence, Plato's writings, especially his dialogues, have become cornerstones of philosophical education and the basis for intellectual discussions for over 2 millennia. One of the most significant marks in Plato's enduring legacy is how he delved deeply into the nature of knowledge, reality, and ethics. His theory of forms, though later criticized and contested by subsequent philosophers, remains one of the most influential metaphysical doctrines in the history of philosophy. The idea that there exists an eternal and perfect reality beyond the sensory world has echoed through the ages, shaping the thinking of intellectuals from Plotinus, founder of Neoplatonism, to modern philosophers like Immanuel Kant, who grappled with the relationship between the material world and the realm of abstract principles. Plato's emphasis on permanence and immutability, particularly through his theory of forms, not only shaped metaphysics, but also had a profound impact on ethical thought. Philosophers have drawn on the notion of unchanging standards of justice and goodness as they sought to apply these ideals to the ever-changing world of human affairs. For centuries after Plato's death, his thought remained central to developments in both pagan and Christian philosophy. During the Hellenistic period, Neoplatonist philosophers like Plotinus and Proclus inherited and expanded Plato's metaphysical ideas, making them a spiritual foundation for Western thought for many centuries. In particular, Plato's vision of the world of forms and the nature of the soul became the basis for Neoplatonist thought, which emphasized the spiritual ascent of the soul on its journey to unity with the divine. This concept stemmed from Plato's debates on the immortality of the soul and its path toward knowledge and truth. Neoplatonism later profoundly shaped Christian theology, especially through the works of early Christian philosophers like Augustine of Hippo. Augustine was deeply influenced by the thought of Plato and the Neoplatonists, blending these philosophical perspectives into his Christian theology. Plato's ideas about the nature of the soul, the existence of an eternal realm beyond the material world, and the relationship between humanity and the divine became pillars shaping medieval Christian metaphysics and ethics. Concepts such as the immortality of the soul, the essence of truth, and the role of reason in understanding God were restructured and harmonized within Christian doctrine. For instance, in the City of God, Augustine painted a vision of a divine realm beyond the material world, echoing Plato's belief in the existence of an eternal, perfect kingdom. This fusion of Plato's philosophy with Christian theology, though not without its conflicts and tensions, illustrates the adaptability of Platonic thought in addressing the profound metaphysical and ethical questions of the ancient and medieval worlds. Plato's influence also extended into education, rooted in his deep belief that education was not merely about transmitting knowledge, but about shaping the soul and guiding people toward virtue. In the Republic, he developed a comprehensive educational system for philosopher kings, emphasizing the importance of physical training, music, mathematics, and dialectical reasoning. This holistic approach, cultivating intellect, body, and moral character, strongly influenced educational models from ancient Greece to the modern era. The idea that education should aim to form virtuous citizens ready to contribute to the common good became a recurring theme in Western educational theory, from classical liberal arts academies to contemporary universities. Plato's image of the philosopher, tirelessly seeking truth and wisdom, left a deep imprint on academic traditions both in the West and the East. This ideal inspired generations of scholars and philosophers, including within the Islamic world. Many of Plato's works were translated into Arabic and studied extensively by thinkers such as Al-Farabi and Avicenna, who integrated Platonic philosophy into their own metaphysical and ethical explorations. Plato's emphasis on the pursuit of truth and the central role of reason in approaching the divine resonated strongly with Islamic philosophy, much like how Neoplatonism wove rationality with spiritual depth. The Renaissance marked a powerful revival of Platonic thought, particularly through the contributions of figures like Marsilio Ficino, who translated many of Plato's works into Latin and helped reintroduce Platonic philosophy into the intellectual heart of Western Europe. Ficino's works, alongside the efforts of other Renaissance humanists, ignited a renewed passion for Plato's ideas, especially the profound connection between beauty, truth, and goodness. Plato's vision of contemplating transcendent realities and striving for virtue, both intellectual and moral, became a spiritual pillar of the Renaissance movement. The rise of humanism during this period spread his influence across art, literature, and philosophy, generating a wave of thought focused on human value and the potential to reach higher ideals. Rediscovery of Plato's dialogues not only revived intense debates on ethics, politics, and metaphysics, but also laid the intellectual groundwork leading into the Enlightenment and modern philosophy. Plato's influence continues to resonate in the works of great thinkers such as Immanuel Kant, Friedrich Nietzsche, and Alfred North Whitehead. Kant, in particular, was deeply impacted by Plato's distinction between the phenomenal world and the world of things in themselves. In his Critique of Pure Reason, Kant inherited and transformed Plato's foundational ideas, demonstrating that the Platonic legacy is not only alive, but continually being recreated and expanded by each generation of intellectuals. Plato's reasoning on the limits of human cognition and the nature of true knowledge has left a profound imprint even in modern philosophical debates. When Kant sought to unravel how the mind shapes our experience of the world, he unconsciously echoed many of Plato's core concerns. Plato's ideas on the nature of reality and the quest for truth continue to resonate across fields such as metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Friedrich Nietzsche, though fiercely critical of Plato, could not entirely escape his intellectual orbit. He famously quipped that all of Western philosophy is a series of footnotes to Plato, underscoring his view that much of Western thought, particularly Christian ethics, has been deeply shaped by Plato's division between the material world and an eternal ideal realm. Nietzsche, while rejecting Plato's belief in transcendence and eternity, championed a philosophy that celebrated life in the material world with all its imperfections and struggles. This rejection paradoxically only underscores the enduring power of Plato's ideas in shaping the foundations of Western philosophy. Plato's political thought, too, has never faded. His critiques of democracy, along with his vision of an ideal state ruled by philosophers, continue to spark debates among political scholars. While many modern thinkers reject his authoritarian model of governance, Plato's sharp insights into the weaknesses of democracy, especially the dangers of populism and mob rule, remain strikingly relevant in today's political climate. His belief, articulated in the Republic, that a just society can only exist when each individual fulfills their proper role, continues to inform debates about justice and social structure. Plato's emphasis on virtue and wisdom in governance also connects directly to modern concerns about expertise and integrity in leadership. Perhaps the most enduring legacy Plato left us is the philosophical method he pioneered. His use of dialogue as a tool for exploring ideas, his emphasis on dialectical reasoning, and his belief that philosophy is an ongoing process of questioning and reflection became cornerstones of the Western philosophical tradition. Plato's dialogues, with their Socratic questioning and exploration of opposing viewpoints, have shaped the way philosophy has been taught and practiced for thousands of years. He left behind a core principle: Philosophy is not about reaching final answers, but about the continual process of reflection, debate, and the expansion of understanding. Beyond philosophy, Plato's ideas have also profoundly influenced many other domains, from politics and education to art and culture. He left an indelible mark on literature, art, and the entirety of human culture. His vision of ideals, perfection, and eternity breathed life into countless works of art, literature, and music, especially in the realms of beauty and aesthetics. The search for the connection between beauty and truth in works like the Symposium and Phaedo inspired generations of artists and writers who strove to capture ideal forms of beauty in their creations. Plato's dialogues, rich with drama and vibrant characters, are celebrated not only as philosophy, but as literary masterpieces in their own right, inspiring writers to weave philosophical themes into their own works. Plato's legacy, in short, stands as one of the most powerful and far-reaching influences in the history of human thought. His ideas about reality, knowledge, ethics, politics, and education continue to shape intellectual discussions across countless fields, from the founding of his academy to the modern world. Plato's philosophy remains central to the Western intellectual tradition, inspiring philosophers, scientists, artists, and educators to embark on their own journeys in pursuit of truth and wisdom. His dialogues, brimming with timeless questions, are as alive and relevant today as when they first echoed through the streets of ancient Athens. They invite us to reflect deeply on the nature of reality, the role of individuals in society, and how to live a meaningful and virtuous life. Plato's enduring influence is a vivid testament to the transformative power of philosophy, helping us reimagine how we see ourselves and the world around us. As we contemplate his legacy, we are reminded that philosophy is not merely an abstract discipline, but a way of life. A practice that calls on us to keep questioning, to hunger for truth, and to strive for wisdom with every heartbeat of our existence. This vision of philosophy as a journey of enlightenment, leading us from the shadows of ignorance into the light of understanding, retains its allure just as powerfully as it did over 2 millennia ago. Through his timeless dialogues and vibrant ideas, Plato continues to invite us to walk alongside him on that path, guiding us toward a deeper understanding of the world and our place within it. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the life and immortal ideas of Plato. We hope you felt the extraordinary influence he has had on philosophy and the entire intellectual tradition of the West. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep exploring more profound content. Always keep your flame of curiosity burning and continue venturing into the world of ideas.